She can't even afford rent." My father laughed when he said it. The sound echoed through the courtroom. A few people actually smiled. My father's attorney smirked and shuffled a stack of papers as if the case had already been won. My younger brother sat behind him with his arms folded, looking at me the same way he had looked at me for most of my life, like I was a disappointment that somehow kept surviving. Then the judge stopped reading. He looked at me, not at my father, not at the attorneys, at me. His expression changed. The room grew strangely quiet. "Wait," he said slowly. His eyes moved from me to my father. "You're telling me they really don't know?" My father's attorney frowned. "Don't know what, Your Honor?" The judge leaned back in his chair. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then he looked down at a document and sighed. "The problem," he said quietly, "is that none of you seem to understand who she actually is." The smile vanished from my father's face, and for the first time that morning, I saw fear. Welcome back to Ashes of Inheritance, where ordinary women keep their composure while everything around them falls apart and walk away with their dignity intact. If you believe the quietest person at the table is often the one holding the most, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. My name is Emily Carter, and the day my father tried to destroy me in court was the same day he learned he had never known me at all. For most of my life, my father believed two things. First, that he was always right. Second, that I would never become anything. The second belief started when I was 12. That was the year my younger brother Kevin hit a baseball through our neighbor's living room window. My father somehow blamed me. I still remember standing in our driveway while glass sparkled across the grass like ice crystals. Kevin was crying. The neighbor was furious. And my father pointed directly at me. "You should have been watching him." I wasn't even there. I had been at the library. But facts never mattered when it came to Kevin. Kevin was the golden child. Kevin was the future. Kevin was the son. And I was simply the daughter. The older I got, the more obvious it became. When Kevin brought home a report card with mostly C's, my father took him out for steak. When I graduated near the top of my class, my father glanced at the certificate and asked why I wasn't first. When Kevin quit 3 different jobs before age 22, my father called him a free spirit. When I worked 2 jobs while attending college classes at night, he called me stubborn. I spent years trying to earn approval that never came. Then one day, I stopped trying. I was 19 when I walked into a military recruiting office. Nobody in my family knew I was going. I didn't tell them because I already knew what my father would say. "Women don't belong there. You'll quit. You'll come home crying. You'll never make it." The strange thing is that he wasn't entirely wrong about one thing. I did cry, just not for the reasons he imagined. I cried during training when my body hurt so badly I thought I might collapse. I cried after losing friends overseas. I cried in empty hotel rooms during deployments when loneliness felt heavier than any equipment I carried. But I never quit. Not once. Years passed. Assignments came and went. Promotions followed. My life moved farther and farther away from the small Texas town where I grew up. Meanwhile, my relationship with my father slowly disappeared. The phone calls became shorter, then rarer, then almost non-existent. Every conversation followed the same pattern. "How's Kevin doing?" I would ask. My father would spend 20 minutes talking about Kevin, Kevin's business ideas, Kevin's latest girlfriend, Kevin's newest truck. Then he'd remember I was still on the line. "What about you?" The question always sounded like an obligation, never curiosity. The first few years I answered honestly. After a while I stopped. There didn't seem much point. When someone doesn't care about your life, eventually you stop offering pieces of it. So I learned to keep things to myself. My promotions, my achievements, my struggles, my successes, everything stayed private. And over time, that privacy became a habit. Then came the property, the piece of land at the center of the lawsuit, 40 acres outside Austin. When I bought it years earlier, nobody in my family even knew it existed. Why would they? They barely knew where I lived. The land wasn't special at first, just open Texas acreage. But development eventually spread toward the area. Property values climbed, then climbed again. Suddenly, the land became worth millions. That was when Kevin discovered it. And that was when the trouble started. According to Kevin, our father deserved part of it. Actually, according to Kevin, our father deserved most of it. The story kept changing. Sometimes they claimed the land had originally belonged to family friends. Sometimes they claimed Dad had contributed money. Sometimes they suggested paperwork had been misunderstood. The details shifted constantly. Only one thing stayed the same. They wanted ownership. I refused. Not because of the money, because the accusations never stopped. Instead of asking, they demanded. Instead of talking, they threatened. Eventually, those threats became a lawsuit. I remember receiving the court papers while sitting in a hotel room during a work trip. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Then, I saw my father's name. I sat there staring at the documents for almost 10 minutes. Not angry, not shocked, just tired, deeply tired. Because after all those years, after all that distance, my father still saw me exactly the same way. Not as a daughter, not as a person, just as an obstacle. The months leading up to the trial were unpleasant but predictable. Depositions, paperwork, attorneys, claims that made no sense. Every time I thought the situation couldn't become more ridiculous, Kevin found a way. But nothing prepared me for seeing my father in court that morning. He looked older. His hair was almost completely gray. His shoulders seemed smaller. For one brief moment, I saw the man who used to carry me on his shoulders at county fairs. The man who taught me how to ride a bicycle. The man I had spent years wanting to impress. Then he opened his mouth and that feeling disappeared. She can't even afford rent. The words landed like a slap. Not because they were true, because they revealed he hadn't changed at all. He still knew nothing about me. Absolutely nothing. As the hearing continued, his attorney painted a picture of me that was almost funny. A struggling woman, unemployed, financially unstable, desperate. I sat quietly and listened. Sometimes silence tells people more than arguments ever can. Across the courtroom, the judge kept reviewing documents again and again. His expression grew more puzzled with each page. At first, I thought nothing of it. Then I noticed something unusual. He wasn't looking confused. He was looking concerned. And when court recessed for 15 minutes, he gathered several files himself instead of handing them to a clerk. As he walked out, he glanced toward me. Recognition flashed briefly across his face, just for a second, but I saw it. And for the first time since the lawsuit began, I had a feeling something unexpected was about to happen. Something neither my father nor Kevin had prepared for. Something that would change everything. The courtroom felt different after the recess. Not louder, not quieter, different. The kind of difference you feel before a thunderstorm arrives. Most people didn't notice it. My father certainly didn't. He sat confidently beside his attorney, occasionally whispering comments to Kevin, and chuckling as if the outcome had already been decided. Kevin looked even more relaxed. He was scrolling through his phone when the judge returned. That alone irritated the bailiff. The judge noticed it too. He said nothing, but his expression hardened. I had spent enough years around senior military leadership to recognize that look. Someone had discovered information, and that information mattered. The hearing resumed. My father's attorney stood and continued presenting his argument. According to him, I had manipulated paperwork. I had hidden financial information. I had intentionally excluded my father from property agreements. The speech lasted nearly 20 minutes. By the end of it, anyone unfamiliar with the facts might have believed I was some kind of professional con artist. The strange part was that I felt almost detached listening to it. Not angry, not defensive, just reflective. Because while he was describing a woman who didn't exist, I found myself thinking about the last time my father had asked me a meaningful question. I couldn't remember it. Not because I was trying to forget, because it genuinely had been that long. The judge finally interrupted. "Mr. Carter." My father straightened proudly. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge folded his hands. "How often do you speak with your daughter?" My father blinked. The question clearly surprised him. "What does that have to do with this case?" "Please answer." My father shifted in his chair. "Not often." "How often?" "A few times a year." The judge nodded. "And during those conversations, what does she do for a living?" Silence. A surprisingly long silence. My father's attorney looked uncomfortable. Kevin suddenly stopped smiling. Finally, my father shrugged. "Government work, I think." The judge stared at him. "Government work? Something like that? Can you be more specific?" "No." The judge looked down at his notes. "Do you know her title?" "No." "Do you know her salary?" "No." "Do you know how long she has worked for the federal government?" "No." Each answer seemed to make the courtroom quieter. The judge turned toward Kevin. "What about you?" Kevin looked annoyed. "Why would I know that?" A few people in the gallery exchanged glances. The judge slowly nodded. "I see." And for the first time, I noticed genuine disappointment in his voice. Not legal frustration, personal disappointment, as though he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. The hearing moved forward, but something had changed. The judge began asking questions neither side expected. Questions about tax records, questions about property transfers, questions about ownership structures, questions about financial disclosures. Every answer favored me. Every document supported me. Every accusation weakened. By lunchtime, my father's attorney no longer looked confident. He looked worried, very worried. Then things became even stranger. A court clerk entered carrying a sealed envelope. The clerk handed it directly to the judge. Not the attorneys, not the court reporter, the judge. He opened it carefully, read the contents, then read them again. I watched his eyes narrow. The room remained silent. My father noticed the change. For the first time all day, uncertainty appeared on his face. The judge placed the documents beside him without comment. The hearing continued, but his attention kept returning to that envelope. I knew why, because I knew what was inside. Not every detail, but enough. The truth was that my career had become complicated over the years. Certain assignments weren't classified in the Hollywood sense. No secret agent nonsense, but they weren't public either. There were projects, programs, responsibilities, the kind of work that required discretion, the kind of work people outside government rarely understood. Whenever family members asked what I did, I usually answered with something simple. "I work for the Army." Most people stopped asking after that. My father certainly had. He never showed enough interest to continue the conversation. Over time, he built his own version of my life, a version that existed entirely inside his imagination. In his mind, I was still the stubborn 19-year-old who had left home, still struggling, still trying to prove something, still failing. Reality never entered the picture because he never bothered to look. Around mid-afternoon, another unusual thing happened. The judge called both attorneys to the bench. Their conversation was private. The white noise machine activated. Nobody could hear a word, but everyone could see faces, and faces tell stories. My attorney remained calm. My father's attorney did not. His expression changed dramatically. At one point, he actually removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. The discussion lasted nearly 5 minutes. When it ended, he returned to his seat, looking shaken. Kevin immediately leaned forward. "What happened?" he whispered. His attorney ignored him. That was the moment Kevin began to worry. I could see it because confidence disappears in stages. First comes irritation, then uncertainty, then fear. Kevin had entered stage 2. The judge resumed proceedings. He turned directly toward my father. "Mr. Carter?" "Yes." "Did you contribute financially to the purchase of the Austin property?" "Yes." My attorney immediately stood. Objection. The judge looked at my father. Do you have documentation? My father hesitated. No bank records? No. Wire transfers? No. Checks? No. The judge nodded slowly. So, your testimony is based solely on memory? Yes. The judge wrote something down. Then he asked a question nobody expected. What year did your daughter purchase the property? My father opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't know. Not even the year. The silence felt painful. Finally, Kevin tried to help. Maybe 2015. Wrong. The property had been purchased years earlier. The judge wrote another note. I could practically see the credibility of their case collapsing. Still, my father refused to back down. That stubbornness had defined him his entire life. Even now, even when facts were turning against him, even when evidence contradicted him. Near the end of the day, he made his biggest mistake. The judge asked another question about ownership. Instead of answering, my father laughed. Actually laughed. Then he pointed toward me. Your Honor, she's making all this look complicated. The judge said nothing. My father continued. She's not some wealthy executive. A few people shifted uncomfortably. She can barely support herself. My attorney closed his eyes. Kevin smirked. My father shook his head. I'd be surprised if she could even pay rent. The courtroom became silent. Not because the comment was offensive, because it sounded absurd. The judge slowly removed his reading glasses. He looked directly at me, then at my father, then at the sealed documents beside him. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. The judge looked as though he was deciding something. Finally, he reached for the envelope again, and that was when I knew the truth was getting closer. Much closer. My father thought this case was about a piece of land. He was wrong. The land was merely the excuse. The real issue sitting in that courtroom was something much bigger. For 20 years, he had made assumptions about his daughter. For 20 years, nobody challenged those assumptions. Tomorrow, that would change. And when it did, the consequences would be far more painful than losing a lawsuit. Because money can be replaced, pride cannot. I barely slept that night. Not because I was worried about the lawsuit. That part was already over whether my father realized it or not. The evidence was overwhelming. The property records were clear. The ownership trail was documented down to the last signature. Legally, there wasn't much left to argue. What kept me awake was something else. Memory. The human mind has a strange habit. When a chapter of your life is about to close, it sometimes forces you to revisit the pages you spent years avoiding. I lay awake in my hotel room staring at the ceiling and thinking about my father. Not the man sitting in the courtroom, the younger version. The father from before everything changed. Before favoritism, before resentment, before disappointment became the language we spoke to each other. I remembered fishing trips when I was 8. I remembered sitting on his shoulders at county fairs. I remembered believing he could solve any problem in the world. Those memories hurt more than the bad ones because they reminded me that things had not always been broken. At some point, they became broken and neither of us ever figured out how to fix them. By morning, I was exhausted. Still, years in the army had taught me how to function without sleep. I arrived at the courthouse early. The building was nearly empty. Only a few attorneys wandered through the hallways carrying coffee and briefcases. I took a seat outside the courtroom and watched the city wake up through the tall windows. The sky was turning pale blue. Traffic was beginning to fill the streets below. Normal people were starting normal days. Meanwhile, my family was preparing to destroy itself over greed. There was something tragic about that. A few minutes later, my attorney arrived. His name was David Reynolds. Smart, calm, almost impossible to rattle. He sat beside me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he handed me a coffee. You ready? I smiled. I've been ready for 20 years. That made him laugh. But there was concern behind it. You know what's coming today? I do. You okay with it? I looked toward the courtroom doors. No. He nodded. Fair answer. Because the truth was complicated. Legally, I wanted the truth exposed. Personally, I wasn't sure. There is a difference between winning a case and watching your father realize he never knew his own daughter. One feels satisfying. The other feels sad. By 9 o'clock, the courtroom began filling. My father arrived with Kevin. The confidence from the previous day was gone. Not entirely, but noticeably. His attorney looked particularly uneasy. He carried a folder so thick it practically bent under its own weight. When he sat down, he immediately began reviewing documents again and again and again. That wasn't the behavior of a man who felt comfortable. The judge entered precisely on time. Everyone stood, then sat. The hearing resumed, and from the very beginning, the atmosphere felt different. The judge wasn't interested in listening to long arguments anymore. He wanted answers, direct answers, specific answers, verifiable answers. My father's attorney attempted to revive several earlier claims. The judge shut them down almost immediately. Counselor, we've already addressed that, but Your Honor, we've addressed it. End of discussion. The attorney sat down, frustrated. Sweating slightly, Kevin noticed. I could see him watching, trying to understand why their case seemed to be slipping away. Then the judge began asking questions again, only this time they were sharper, more precise, more dangerous. Mr. Carter, do you know where your daughter was stationed during the last 10 years? No. Do you know what positions she held? No. Do you know whether she owned property outside Texas? No. Do you know whether she maintained investment accounts? No. Do you know whether she has any federal security clearances? The question landed like a hammer. My father's forehead wrinkled. What? The judge repeated it. My father looked confused. No. The judge nodded. Then he asked something even stranger. Have you ever reviewed your daughter's professional qualifications? My father actually laughed, a nervous laugh. No. The judge leaned back. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he quietly wrote another note. The silence felt heavier than any argument. Eventually, my father's attorney stood. Your Honor, with respect, I'm struggling to understand the relevance of these questions. The judge looked at him, and for the first time there was visible irritation in his voice. The relevance is that your entire case appears to be based on assumptions. The attorney opened his mouth, then closed it because there was no response. The judge wasn't wrong. Everything they believed about me was based on assumptions, not evidence, not facts, assumptions. A short time later, another clerk entered, this time carrying additional documentation. The judge reviewed it carefully. Then something happened that made the entire room uneasy. He stopped, completely stopped. No writing, no reading, no questions, just silence. His eyes remained fixed on one particular page. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. Finally, he exhaled slowly across the courtroom. My father shifted in his seat. Kevin looked visibly nervous. Even the attorneys sensed something. The judge closed the folder, then turned toward my attorney. Mr. Reynolds. Yes, Your Honor. Has your client intentionally avoided discussing her professional background during these proceedings? My attorney glanced toward me, then nodded. Yes. The courtroom stirred. The judge looked back at me. Was that your choice? It was. Why? I thought carefully before answering. Because the truth mattered. Because this case is about ownership, not my career. The judge studied my face, then nodded once. Fair enough. But his expression suggested he disagreed. A few moments later, the hearing continued. Yet everyone could feel the shift. Curiosity had entered the room. People wanted to know what was hidden inside those files. What information had transformed a routine property dispute into something unusual. Even Kevin could no longer sit still. He whispered repeatedly to his attorney. Each time he was ignored. Then came the moment that changed everything. The judge picked up a document, looked directly at my father, and asked a simple question, Mr. Carter, what exactly do you believe your daughter does for the government? My father shrugged. Office work. Several people exchanged looks. The judge blinked. Office work. Something like that. The judge removed his glasses again, slowly, carefully, as though he needed a moment to process what he had just heard. Then he looked toward me. Our eyes met, and in that instant, I understood what was coming. The judge wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. He wasn't trying to create drama. He was trying to prevent something worse. Because once certain truths entered the public record, there would be no taking them back. No pretending, no denial, no comfortable illusions, only reality. And reality was about to arrive. The hearing adjourned briefly before the afternoon session. As people stood and stretched, I remained seated. My father glanced toward me. For the first time in years, our eyes met for more than a second. There was confusion there, uncertainty, a growing sense that something was wrong, very wrong. He still didn't understand what, but he could feel it. The same way people feel distant thunder before they hear it. The storm was coming, and when court reconvened, the question that would change everything was finally going to be asked. When the afternoon session began, the courtroom was fuller than it had been all week. Word had spread, not through newspapers, not through television. Courts have their own ecosystem. Clerks talk, attorneys talk, bailiffs talk. People notice when a routine civil dispute suddenly attracts unusual attention from a judge. By the time everyone returned to their seats, curiosity hung in the room like humidity before a storm. I sat quietly beside my attorney. My father looked irritated. Kevin looked nervous. The judge looked tired. That last detail stood out to me. Not physically tired, emotionally tired, like a man who had spent hours staring at information he wished he didn't have to reveal. After the clerk called the session back to order, silence settled across the courtroom. The judge reviewed a few final documents. Then he closed the folder slowly, deliberately. The sound echoed through the room. That was when I knew this was it. The moment everything changed, the judge looked directly at me, not at my attorney, not at my father, at me. And then he asked the question, "Miss Carter?" "Yes, Your Honor." His expression softened slightly, almost apologetically. "You've chosen not to discuss your professional background during these proceedings." "That's correct." "Was that intentional?" "Yes." "Why?" I took a breath. Because despite everything that had happened, I didn't want this moment to become a spectacle. My career isn't relevant to who owns the property. The judge nodded. "I understand." Then he turned toward my father. "Mr. Carter." My father straightened immediately. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge paused. For several seconds, he simply studied him. The room became impossibly quiet. Then he asked, "So they really don't know?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Confusion spread instantly. My father frowned. Kevin looked bewildered. Even several attorneys exchanged glances. My father spoke first. "Know what?" The judge didn't answer. Instead, he looked back toward me. I held his gaze, and after a long moment, I said the only truthful thing I could. "No, Your Honor." The silence that followed felt endless. My father's attorney stood. "Your Honor, I'm sorry, but I don't understand." The judge leaned back in his chair. Neither did anyone else. The attorney continued. "Know what?" For the first time all day, the judge sighed. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just the exhausted sigh of a man who knew there was no way around what came next. He opened the folder, looked down, then back up. "The problem," he said quietly, "is that this entire case has been built on a fundamentally false assumption." My father's expression hardened. "What assumption?" The judge ignored him. His attention remained on the documents. Then he spoke again. "Mr. Carter has repeatedly described his daughter as financially unstable." No response. "He has repeatedly testified that she lacks significant assets." Still no response. He has repeatedly suggested she struggles to support herself. Kevin shifted in his seat. My father's attorney slowly sat back down. Then the judge looked directly at them. And none of those statements appear to be remotely true. The room froze. My father laughed nervously. That's ridiculous. The judge didn't react. Instead, he lifted one page from the folder. Just one. But apparently, it was enough because when he looked at it, even he seemed slightly stunned. Then came the sentence. The sentence that changed everything. Actually, he said, the courtroom seemed to stop breathing. She is Colonel Emily Carter. Silence. Complete silence. Not a cough. Not a whisper. Nothing. My father's face emptied. The smile vanished. The confidence vanished. Even the anger vanished. All that remained was shock. What? The word barely escaped his mouth. The judge continued. United States Army. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. Kevin stared at me. His eyes looked almost comical, like his brain couldn't process what it had just heard. My father's attorney looked physically ill. The judge kept speaking, not dramatically, matter-of-factly. Like someone reading information from a file, Colonel Carter has served for approximately 2 decades. My father remained frozen. She has held multiple senior leadership assignments, still frozen. She currently oversees programs involving substantial federal responsibilities. The room stayed silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic outside, the soft turning of pages. Every tiny noise suddenly seemed loud. My father slowly turned toward me, and for the first time in my life, I saw him looking at me as though I were a stranger. Because I was not literally, but emotionally. The version of me that existed in his mind had never been real. The daughter he thought he knew had existed only inside his imagination. The actual woman sitting 20 feet away was someone he'd never bothered to meet. The judge wasn't finished. The financial records submitted to this court indicate that Colonel Carter purchased the Austin property entirely with her own funds. Another blow, the ownership trail is documented. Another, the investment structure is documented. Another, the tax history is documented. Another, the appreciation in value is lawful and properly recorded. Another, each sentence felt like a hammer striking concrete. My father's case wasn't merely weak, it was collapsing publicly, completely. Then came the detail that truly shattered him. The judge looked down again, then back up. The current value associated with assets connected to the property exceeds $12 million. A gasp escaped somewhere in the gallery. My father looked like he had stopped breathing. 12. He couldn't finish the sentence. The judge nodded. Approximately. My father turned toward Kevin. Kevin looked equally stunned. Neither man knew what to say, because for years they had built an entire narrative. Emily failed. Emily struggled. Emily never accomplished anything. Emily left home and disappeared. Now reality was sitting in front of them, and reality looked very different. The judge closed the folder finally gently, as though he understood the damage that had just been done. Not legal damage, personal damage, family damage, the kind that cannot be repaired with money. My father stared at me for a long time, longer than he had looked at me in years. Then he whispered something so quietly only a few people heard it. "You're really a colonel." I met his eyes. For a moment, 20 years disappeared. The arguments, the distance, the disappointment, everything. I saw only an aging father trying desperately to understand the daughter standing in front of him. And somehow that hurt more than his insults ever had. "Yes," I said softly. His face went pale. Not because of the rank, not because of the money, not because of the lawsuit, because at that exact moment, he realized something far worse. He had spent 20 years telling the world who his daughter was, and he had been wrong every single day. Nobody spoke for several seconds after I answered. Yes, such a small word. Yet, it seemed to echo through the courtroom. My father remained frozen in his chair. His eyes never left mine. I could practically see the memories moving behind them. Not memories of lawsuits, not memories of property disputes, memories of birthdays he missed, conversations he never had, questions he never asked, years he never cared enough to understand. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, I wasn't angry. That surprised me. You spend enough years imagining a confrontation, and you assume it will feel satisfying when it finally arrives. You imagine vindication, you imagine triumph, you imagine justice. But sitting there looking at my 70-year-old father, I felt something else. Sadness. Because there was no victory in watching a parent realize he had wasted decades. The judge eventually broke the silence. Mr. Carter, based on the evidence presented, the court finds no basis for your claims regarding ownership of the Austin property. His voice was calm, professional, final. The property was lawfully acquired by Colonel Carter. My father didn't react. The ownership records are valid. Nothing. The financial documentation is clear. Still nothing. The plaintiff's claims are therefore denied. The words should have been devastating. They should have triggered outrage, an argument, a protest, something. Instead, my father simply sat there staring at me as though the lawsuit had ceased to matter. And maybe it had, because losing a case hurts. Discovering you've lost 20 years hurts far more, the judge continued. The court also orders the plaintiff to assume responsibility for applicable legal expenses as outlined by state law. Kevin suddenly stood. That's not fair. His attorney immediately pulled him back into his chair. The judge looked unimpressed. It is not a question of fairness. Kevin's face wrined. We didn't know. The statement slipped out before he could stop it. The judge tilted his head. Precisely. The room grew quiet again because everyone understood what he meant. They didn't know, not because information had been hidden, because they had never cared enough to ask. There is a difference, a very important difference. The hearing officially ended a few minutes later. People began gathering papers, chairs moved, conversations resumed. The normal sounds of a courthouse returned. Yet, my father remained seated, motionless. I started organizing my own documents when I heard his voice. Emily. The sound stopped me. I hadn't heard him say my name like that in years. Not with anger, not with criticism, just my name. I turned slowly. My father was standing now, looking older than I had ever seen him. Smaller, fragile, human. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked the question, "Why didn't you tell me?" I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. 20 years, 20 years of silence, 20 years of assumptions, 20 years of disinterest. And somehow he believed the missing piece was that I hadn't told him. I considered several responses, then chose the truth. I tried. His face tightened. What? I tried. The words came quietly, steadily. I called. His eyes dropped. I visited. Silence. I sent photos. More silence. I talked about training. Nothing. I talked about deployments. His shoulders slumped. I talked about promotions. The courtroom had nearly emptied by now, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, we were finally having a real conversation. You never listened. My father looked away because he knew it was true. The painful thing about truth isn't hearing it, it's recognizing it. Kevin approached slowly. He looked shaken, completely different from the arrogant man who had entered the courthouse days earlier. Emily, I looked at him. What? His voice cracked. You really did all that? I nodded. For a moment he seemed unable to speak. Then he whispered, I didn't know. Again the same sentence. Nobody knew. Nobody knew. Nobody knew. But the reality was simpler. Nobody asked. The distinction mattered. A lot. My attorney quietly stepped away to give us privacy. The judge had already left. Most of the spectators were gone. Only a handful of people remained. My father finally spoke again. "When your mother died." His voice broke. The sentence stopped, then restarted. "When your mother died, I wasn't a very good father." I didn't answer because arguing would have been pointless. He wasn't admitting something I didn't know. He was admitting something he had spent years denying. I focused on Kevin. Another pause. I thought he needed me more. I stared at him. The irony almost hurt because while he was focusing on Kevin, Kevin never truly grew up. Meanwhile, the daughter he ignored learned how to survive alone. Sometimes the people we protect the most become the weakest. Sometimes the people we neglect become the strongest. Not because they're special, because they have no choice. My father swallowed hard. Then came the sentence I never expected to hear. I was wrong. The words hung in the air, simple, honest, late, very late, but honest. For a few seconds, I saw the father I used to love. Not the bitter man from the courtroom, not the angry man from the lawsuit. Just my father, older, broken, regretful. Unfortunately, regret doesn't reverse time. I stepped closer, not out of anger, not out of revenge, simply because I wanted him to hear me clearly. "You didn't lose this case today." He looked confused. "What? You didn't lose this case?" His eyes searched mine. "Then what did I lose?" I took a slow breath. The answer hurt both of us. "You lost the daughter who spent 20 years hoping you'd be proud of her." His face collapsed. I watched the realization hit him. Not all at once. Piece by piece, memory by memory, year by year. The missed calls, the ignored conversations, the assumptions, the criticism, the distance. Every choice eventually carries a cost. This was his. Tears appeared in his eyes, the first I had ever seen. But strangely, I didn't feel satisfaction, only peace. Because for the first time, the truth existed between us. No lies, no illusions, no pretending, just truth. A few minutes later, I walked out of the courthouse. The Texas afternoon sun felt warm against my skin, bright, clean, free. At the curb, a government vehicle waited. One of the senior officers associated with my current assignment had arrived for a scheduled meeting nearby and offered me transportation. As I approached, he stepped out and shook my hand. We exchanged a few words, professional, routine, nothing dramatic. Yet when I glanced back, I saw my father standing near the courthouse entrance, watching. He wasn't looking at the vehicle or the officer or the lawsuit. He was looking at me, finally seeing me, maybe for the first time. Then, the distance between us grew step by step until he became smaller in the reflection behind me and eventually disappeared altogether. Some endings are loud, some endings are explosive. This one wasn't. It was quiet. A father sitting alone with regret. A daughter walking away with peace. And sometimes that's the most powerful ending of all. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had someone underestimate you only to discover the truth much later? Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Your stories matter too. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories about family resilience, justice, and second chances, please subscribe and join us. We have many more powerful journeys to share, and I'd be honored to have you along for the next